Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I am the commanding officer of the French nuclear-powered attack submarine, Suffren, a Barracuda-class boat built for patient work in deep water and quiet corridors of the sea. We left Toulon in clean weather and routine spirits, with the familiar thrum of the K-15 reactor braided into every bulkhead, and my crew moving through their watch rotations like a concert we had rehearsed for years. We were in the North Atlantic, west of the continental shelf, when the world above changed in a way we could barely understand from below. It began as a flutter in the message queue, spilled next into broken transmissions over VLF and ALF, and then settled into a harsh new rule. Do not surface near populated shores. Maintain readiness. Await further orders. And with that, the ocean around us, our protective wall of water, became both sanctuary and prison. On the morning my ship's medical officer logged the first anxious faces, ELF hummed at a low frequency that vibrated the deck plates under my boots. The watch officer, Lieutenant de Vaisseau Lord Chabrier, passed me the clipboard without a word, in longhand on the message form, because our procedures demand redundancy in crises, were the phrases I had hoped never to see: widespread violent outbreaks, infrastructure degraded, ports under quarantine, and most damning, avoid surface contact with populated zones. The origin flag read NATO Marcom. Time group verified by the crypto device recessed behind the comms console. It wasn't rumour, it wasn't a drill. I assembled the key department heads in the Centre Operations Aide de Conduite, while we kept depth at 180 metres, speed ordered back to 5 knots. The maitre principal at Sonar, Vartanian, already had the towed arrays streamed and the flank arrays chirping in a steady pattern. The second, my executive officer, Capitaine de Corvette Adrien Louvigny, stood to my right with his arms folded, jaw working through a thought he hadn't voiced. Our ingénieur énergie, reactor officer, ingénieur principal Elise Saint-Martin, wore the look of someone counting filter life in her head. We need to lock our posture, I said, keeping my voice even. Endurance is power. We can recycle air and water for months, but food is finite. We are 65 souls aboard with stores for roughly 80 days at standard rationing. That number goes down if we start opening the galley like it's Sunday in Toulon. Sir, Louvigny said, crew will want to call home. They will want answers. I know, we'll synchronize short morale calls via secure channels when we have confidence we won't compromise our position, not before. And we assume there is no shore support, no safe port, until something higher than rumour says otherwise. We moved the submarine into a discipline I had never truly felt in peacetime. Hatches were dogged open or shut by a checklist that never left the chain of custody. The airflow regime changed. CO2 scrubbers took on a sacred, metronomic significance. The ECS team watched oxygen candles like misers. The MCO, chef machine, divided his crew into 2 fault-tolerant sections, so any illness would not sweep through the entire propulsion team at once. We rotated the watch bill to maximize rest without sacrificing awareness, and still, worry seeped in between the plates. I walked the boat more than usual those first days. A commanding officer does that when news is bad, not to be seen as a politician shaking hands, but to smell the air, to hear the conversations that end when boots approach, and to sense if any one compartment feels heavier than the rest. I paused in the torpedo room, where Katia Mitra Ravel was polishing an F-21 torpedo's external connector with the deliberate care of a jeweller. "Good morning, Captain," he said, standing straighter. "Good morning. How many F-21s aboard?" 12, sir, with exercise wire spools repacked to operational. Diagnostics green on all. 2 SM-39, exosets in canisters, checkouts complete yesterday, and the MDCN land attack missiles, 4 loaded in the racks for tube launch. We did the last confidence checks before patrol. I nodded. The MDCN was all conventional, precision land attack, useful, but not a symbol of last resorts. The nuclear deterrent sat with our colleagues on the triumphant-class SSBNs at Ile Longue. Still, the very fact that our strike playbook existed at all made the compartment feel a degree colder. We carved time for training to keep hands busy. The pilot and co-pilot practiced shallow water approaches on the simulator. The sonar team drilled on biologic discrimination. Dolphin harmonics from wave slap, merchant cavitation from turbine whine, so that any change in the Atlantic's voice would register instantly. And when we'd wrung those drills dry, we repeated them with a layer of fatigue and noise, because the ocean never gifts you the textbook version. News came in fragments when we dared to hoist an antenna. On one pass, we heard a pan-European broadcast repeating in half a dozen languages: remain indoors, avoid contact with those showing fever and disorientation, obey local authorities. On another, we intercepted a DGSE advisory that many automated maritime beacons were no longer being maintained. Derelict hazards became a new category on our chart. Then nothing for long stretches. The water around us was steady, but the sense of the surface unspooled from real knowledge into a shadow. The fissures in morale began as sighs. Maître Baptiste in the galley asked if we could serve coffee more freely to keep spirits up. A sonar operator, second Maître Diop, requested extra time in the gym corner to lift off the anxiety. Junior ranks began a quiet ritual of writing letters they could not send, folding them and tucking them into the spaces above their racks. Louvigny and I set up a rotation for private conversations in the wardroom, and men and women who had always seemed bulletproof in underway posture now sat with us and asked questions I could not answer. Was Marseille safe? Were the trains still running? Could we go to Brest just to look with the periscope and maybe send a message? I told them what was true. We would not risk the boat or the crew for a glimpse, and still, those eyes lingered a heartbeat too long on mine, as if the right look would unlock a different answer. On the 6th day, after the first broadcast, Elf delivered something unlike the others. It was shorter. It was written in the compact syntax you use when seconds and power are precious. It said, "Port quarantines universal, maritime approaches unsafe, deterrence posture at captain's discretion, do not compromise survivability, no replenishment guaranteed." There were authentication trigrams that checked out. It did not say who was left to send another. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard my crew in the metal, small clinks from a pipe as temperature changed, a soft thud as a book found the floor in the adjacent cabin, the distant whoosh of the air recycling plant. You learn to map sounds on a submarine, not just to systems but to moods. A cheerful crew sounds different than a scared one. They turn pages faster. They laugh at the same lines in old movies. They hum, God help us, they hum. Spry bits of songs that make you think of Marseille markets and Paris cafes. Here now, the boat sounded careful. On the 10th day, Vartanian called me into the COC with 3 words that always put electricity into the air. Traffic, multiple, close. We came to PD, periscope depth, well offshore, in a sector where traffic separation schemes usually kept ships honest. I looked through the optronic mast and saw the sea in grey scales, no running lights, no wake lines, and yet the radar return was clear. A huge container ship, dead in the water, with smaller contacts around it like planets around a failed sun. Through the scope I could make out the rust ribbon along the hull where the water kissed steel, and beyond it, the deck stacked with containers. On the bridge wing, there was a human shape. It waved something, a flag, a jacket. The details hopped in the chop. No other vessels responded to their radio. The ship's AIS data was absent. Only the wind was constant. "I see them," Louvigny said softly, "and they see us seeing them." "Down scope," I ordered. We slid back under the surface, away from that set of decisions. We had no safe way to board, no guarantee about anyone's health. And if the ocean's rips put the container ship into us at PD, A mission would end at the bottom with a headline no one would read. It felt cruel and necessary in the same breath. In the wardroom that afternoon, Enseigne de Vaisseau Fay, the youngest officer aboard, asked without ornament, "Sir, what are we if not French sailors who help people at sea?" "We are that," I said. "We are also a pressure hull with the endurance to keep 65 alive for months if we husband it. If we get sick in the hull and it spreads, we have nowhere to go for help. There are decisions I never imagined I would make. This is one of them." That night, a rumour moved down the compartment line so quickly that when it arrived in my cabin, it felt like it had always been there. Brest was burning. We did what you do when the mind turns rumour into certainty. We built a plan to find out. We approached the coast after 2 weeks of rationing and drills. We navigated an approach lane choosier than any I had used in exercise, threading bathymetric contours to keep the thermocline between us and curious ears. Vartanian kept the towed array riding at the depth where sound speed profile bent in our favour. Our plotters marked civilian anchorages, the submarine transit corridors, and the exclusion zones around Ile Longue, the base for the strategic fleet. Brest had always been our picture on a chart, a place of orders and refits and friends in the same uniforms ashore. Now, it was a study in what not to risk. At PD in pre-dawn grey, I raised the scope just high enough to wet the head. I spun the optics slowly a full circle and stopped when I found the city. Smoke smeared the skyline over the commercial port. Bright points flickered where I'd never seen uncontrolled flame before. The naval base lay quiet in a way that felt wrong in my bones. The water near the quays was speckled with small craft at odd angles, some half sunk against their lines. The Ile Longue security perimeter looked intact, but I could not see movement. We did not ping active sonar. We did not transmit. We watched. "Sir," Chabrier said, "movement on the military quay. Look, at the foot of the crane." I dialed in. Figures, people, clustered near the waterline. Some held cloths and waved. Others moved with a staggering lack of coordination along the edge. I felt the muscles in my back tighten, that reflexive urge to pull away and the counter-move to stay and gather facts. The hand that held the periscope controls did not shake, but my forearm felt every beat of my heart. "Downscope," I said, "back to 60 meters." The boat slid into its element with a grace that never fails to feel like absolution. We were under for less than a minute when sonar spoke again, this time in the register of danger. A low, smooth sound entered the waterfall display. Not merchant noise and not the fast tick of a fishing boat. This was the high-quality mechanical song of a nuclear submarine's pump jet. The trace was faint and then strong, and its colour against our filters made Vartanian nod to himself even before he reported. "New contact, bearing 082. Narrowband suggests PWR with characteristics matching British astute class. Range unknown, likely inside 10 nautical miles, perhaps less. Contact speed fluctuating. Sir, their manoeuvring looks wrong." I leaned in over his shoulder, looking at the low-frequency analyzer and recorder patterns. The line drifted, paused, then drifted again. A boat at periscope depth doing short moves, or a boat with indecision on the con. We went instinctively into the chess of the deep. Chabrier ordered a quiet turn to keep our baffles clear. Vartanian asked for a little more stern to keep the towed array honest. We slid toward the deeper water south of the traffic lanes, using the bathymetry as shelter. I kept my voice low, because even measured words run hot when the other player on the board is someone you know by class and reputation. "Do we have their towed array in the water?" I asked. "Likely," Vartanian said, "but they're not holding steady in a way that suggests a calm team. Their speed changes fast in small bursts." "If their captain is unwell," Louvigny said, not looking at me, "the control room may be a very loud place." We tried them on the underwater telephone in a secure burst, the kind of cautious signal that says we are not here to posture. No answer. We tried again, sending a short code that translated to a position report request and a safety message. Risk of collision. Advise intentions. The water gave us only our own voices coming back as an echo. The next minutes were all smell and memory, the scent of the COC, electronics, coffee, human, insulation, and the weight of previous exercises where we had played cat and mouse with friendly nations in peacetime rules. This was not that. This was two quiet predators in shallow water, near a coastline, whose rules had been thrown into the furnace. We stopped thinking in terms of pride and started thinking in terms of survivability and obligation. Match their speed, I said. Keep them off our bow. Vartanian, if they close, give me bearing rate. Chabria, be ready for emergency deep and a hard rudder turn. If they go nose on, we cannot afford a mutual detection dance. I will not shoot unless we have no other choice. Repeat that to the weapons officer. Oui, Commandant, Chabrier said. The astute did not press. It wandered in a pattern that made me think of a pilot counting seconds under a cloud deck looking for a runway, even though we were both under the same ocean. The idea came uninvited that maybe they had lost their captain to illness or to panic, and some junior officer was now holding a tool too heavy for the first hours of learning. I felt something that was not pity, exactly, but a cousin of it. The recognition of a fellow mariner trying to keep a hull intact under impossible light. We slid away, not running, but not trailing either, and found that seam in the sound speed profile that keeps a secret. After an hour of cat-footing, the British trace thinned and then fell below our noise floor. We let our breath out in a way none of us would own. Back in the wardroom, Louvigny stared at the chart and tapped a knuckle near breast. What if that was the last voice in their boat, he said. What if the person with the most experience could not finish the transit? Then someone else will have to finish it, I said. It is a hard truth. We train for redundancy, but when the best person goes down, the machine itself becomes a test of humanity. He looked up at me and then down at his hands. We need to prepare the crew for a very long period without help. They are already preparing, I said. What we need to do is keep them together. That effort became work more delicate than any maneuver. The rumours from home, stoked by what little we could confirm, ate at people in different ways. Second Maitre Diop's sister worked in a clinic near Saint-Nazaire. He imagined every siren. Cotier Maitre Ravel's partner was due to give birth in 2 months. He asked if we could surface just long enough for one call. Maitre Baptiste's son was on a fishing boat. The thought of him alone on an empty sea hollowed the man's face. We could not grant all wishes. We did, in one controlled window, raise a mast to pipe a dozen short messages through a relay buoy. Pre-written, vetted for operational security, limited in length. The ING comm team used a low probability of intercept mode and a time block so small it felt like sticking our heads out of a hatch during shelling. It was not enough. It was also everything. I met with Dr. Mile Fontenay, our medical officer, in the small surgery that smelled faintly of antiseptic and metal. You know what I'm going to ask, I said. Yes, he said. What happens if somebody gets sick? We will not be able to tell a fever from fear in the first hour, I said. We need a protocol that is real and that people will respect. He put a hand on the stainless table and looked at his reflection. In a submarine, any respiratory illness becomes a shipboard event by default. We can isolate quarters, we can mask, we can segment watch sections, and we can use the aft berthing as a quarantine zone with a portable scrubber. But if something highly contagious enters the air handling system, we have to keep it out, I finished for him. We cannot board other vessels. We cannot bring survivors below. We cannot accept reprovisioning parties whose health we cannot guarantee. Correct, he said. We must also be prepared for the crew to resent that policy when the person at the hatch is a friend. I thought of the container ship at PD and felt a familiar ache. We must be better at saying no than we want to be, I said. The bosun called me to the forward compartment 2 days later. A junior sonar tech, Matelot Arnaud, had presented to sick bay with a headache and low-grade fever. Fontenay had him masked and in the aft isolation rack before I got there. Could be nothing, the doctor said. Could be a stress response, could be dehydration. I'm treating symptoms, monitoring vitals, and will run quick blood work with what we have. I stood at the foot of the rack and looked up at Arnaud's eyes. He was 23 years old and had 3 years at sea. He looked embarrassed to be the center of attention. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Like I studied all night before an exam," he said, trying to smile. "I'll be fine tomorrow." "You rest," I said. "We will check on you at regular intervals." When I stepped out, Louvigny waited for me. He spoke low so the corridor overhead wouldn't catch the words and carry them like a rumor. If he worsens, we need to be ready to tighten the ship even more, sectionalize everything. "Agreed," I said, "and we need to prepare for the ethical questions that will follow." He nodded once. "I will back you in public. In private, I will argue with you as needed." "Good," I said. "We are healthiest when those two things are true." Over the next day, Arnaud's fever climbed and then eased. He slept like a person who'd been holding his breath for a week and finally found air. He recovered without incident. The message was not lost on the boat. We had dodged a first bullet. There would be more. The elf voice that had been our thin strand to structured authority faded a week later. We received half a line of text. "Maintain silent Poe," and then only the low hum of the Earth's electric nature. In the comms log, ENS Fay wrote the last receipt time in ink and drew a meticulous line under it, as if to say, "We will measure from this moment forward differently." There is a set of sealed envelopes on any submarine that a captain opens only under procedures that make your hands slow themselves for respect. They do not all contain orders in the dramatic sense that fiction gives such papers. Many contain layered guidance, legal references, and authorities to be assumed if command above is absent. I convened the minimum number of officers necessary and opened what pertained to an attack submarine in a world where shore commanders were unanswered. There were no instructions that turned us into something we were not. There was guidance to preserve the vessel, protect the crew, provide intelligence when safely possible, avoid entanglement near shore conflict, and, if necessary, employ our conventional assets in the service of protecting life and maritime order if no higher French authority could be reached. The sections about nuclear matters referred, as they always have, to platforms we were not. The strategic boats with their M51 missiles and the airborne component. I felt relief that the world had not slid fully into a version where my decisions would have physics beyond my conscience. We carried MDCN, F-21 and SM-39. Those were heavy enough questions. I briefed the officers in language that left no room for embellishment. "We will not pretend we are the strategic fleet," I said. "We will not invent authorities not ours. We will, under lawful self-defense and under the protection of life principles, use our weapons only if there is no other way to keep the crew or innocents alive. The most important weapon we have is stealth and judgment. Everyone in this room will speak with one voice to the crew. We are France at sea when France's voice is quiet." They nodded. They needed that center line as much as I did. We stretched food through discipline. The galley reduced portions by 20% and filled plates with more rice and shelf-stable vegetables. Coffee went on a schedule that made sense to engineers and felt like austerity to the rest. We rationed treats, the chocolate bars, the tins of peaches that always taste like shore, by watch section so resentments would not grow like mold in hidden corners. Maitre Baptiste ran the galley like a maestro, cutting waste to near zero with a seriousness that made me want to award him a medal. We created work that mattered. Vartanian built a contact database that turned the Atlantic into a living map of what still moved and what had gone still. We tagged derelicts, we plotted drifts, we listened to storm tracks. We stayed far from shipping lanes that had become corridors of hazard. Now and then, we rose to PD and sent a compact signal burst with anonymized data. Large derelict at this position. Current suggests slow movement to busy approaches. Caution. We did not sign our name to those messages. The sea signs its own memos. What mattered was that someone might read them. It was in that rhythm, quiet, intent, frayed only at the edges, that we received the radio intercept that changed our second act. An English-language emergency channel carried a transmission with a tone I recognized from collision regulations and prayers. A voice saying avenues of escape were blocked, that people were gathering on certain quays at Brest, that there were others who moved differently, with a lack of a reason that put everyone at risk. The word used for those others was not one I will write here. You know the image. You do not need the label. The message pleaded for maritime help and advised that any vessel approaching would face masses on the docks who would attempt to board. There was a suggestion, underlined with fear rather than authority, that rescue from the water by small craft might be safer than approaching a quay. We can't be a ferry, Chabrier said when we gathered. We can't break our own seal to bring people below. We don't have to, I said, but we can scout. We have eyes, we have ears. We can give information others might use. And if there is a situation where our conventional missiles can remove a hazard at sea, a blockage, a burning hulk drifting toward a petro quay, we can consider that if it protects life, and if we can do so without creating different disaster. Collateral, Louvigny began, and I lifted a hand. We will not fire into a port, I said. We will not strike anything that puts civilians at risk, but a derelict tanker in open water drifting toward a refinery island. That we can solve, carefully. Maybe we can alter a trajectory by putting a hole in the bow to sink it before it becomes a ball of fire at someone's fuel dock. An F-21? Ravel asked from the back, having slipped into the room on some errand and remaining because the air tasted like decisions. Quiet, precise. You can choose detonation type. Perhaps, I said, but we must solve a problem before we use a solution, and we will need the ministry, or what stands for it now, to bless any target not in direct self-defense. The lines matter. The astute may still be in the area, Vartanian said. If she's operating erratically, she may complicate any precise work. I looked at the young faces, the seasoned faces, and the faces that were simply tired. We will take one step. We will study the approaches to Brest with optics and hydrophone. We will not be seen. We will not transmit unless there is a way to do so that keeps us safe. And we will not commit to anything that makes us something we are not. Dawn over water is a thing of geometry, and the lens in a periscope makes it feel engineered. The sky steps through gradients as the sea decides what color to be, and you are a steady point watching that negotiation. Brest wore smoke in bands. The cranes at the commercial port were fixed poses against a pale background. Their usual ant march of movement was absent. The naval base's quays were too crisp, too tidy, as if a parade review had been called and no one had shown up. We sent up a thin mast antenna to receive only. No active transmissions, no interrogation of surface radar. The optical head resolved the city centre. A building with a curved facade burned from an upper floor, the flames strangely slow in the still air. On the military side, the slipways sat empty. A few small boats lay moored askew, lines too taut in some places, and draped lazy in others, telling a story of rushed departures and forgotten knots. Sir, Chabrier said, look at the commercial quay near the ferry terminal. I saw people. We counted at least 50 in a tight cluster, more moving along the seawall. Some waved, some stood too close to the edge, swaying in a way that made my hands itch to grab them back to safety. On the road behind, movement in broken patterns, too fast, then oddly slow, and then a wave of people running, not organized, as if anyone who could still sprint did so because something back the way they came had frightened them. The cluster at the water's edge shifted, and then some of those who had been standing quietly began to lurch into others with arms outstretched. The line between behaviors blurred into one moving mass, and even from the tranquil remove of optics, I felt the wrongness in my gut. "We're down," I said, putting the scope away. 60 meters, Vartanian, passive only. Everyone else, breathe. Back under the layer, we all stood very still, as if motion could attract something we did not name. The silence of a submarine in that mode is a living thing. Air still moves, metal expands, water whispers along the hull, but your ears turn into instruments tuned for threat. We stayed like that for minutes that tried to grow teeth. "I am hearing low-frequency mechanical at bearing 079, Vartanian said at last, almost tenderly. "Likely our British friend. Speed 3 knots, depth perhaps shallow. Their bearing rate says they're in a lazy turn. They are not closing. If anything, they are sliding off." "Do not tempt them," I said, and the boat seemed to agree. We had work. If we could not ferry people, we could do what submarines do. We could draw a map of risk. We put together a picture of the channels, the drift of small boats left to tides, the dangerous convergence near the mouth where wind and current pile debris. We recorded an anomalous AIS ping from a tug whose transponder had somehow stayed alive. The signal said it was at anchor, but our optics had told a different story. We noted a tanker well to the northwest making 5 knots on a track that would bring it near a set of islands days from now. If uncorrected, it could become a hazard to a little port that deserved better luck. We saved all of this with timestamps, knowing that even in a world bending away from order, someone might find a way to read it. The question of direct help came harder and sooner than I would have liked. On our second morning in the approaches, a small, rigid hull inflatable with a broken canvas awning came out from the shadow of a pier, its outboard coughing and then catching. There were 6 people aboard. Through the scope, I saw the same thing in every pair of eyes. Resolve mixed with fear. 2 wore reflective vests. One in the bow held a flare gun that he did not point at the sky. They made no radio call. They simply headed into open water, and behind them, along the quay, figures moving in that disjointed way came down to where the inflatable had been. "Range?" I asked. 1,500 meters, Chabrier said. "They will pass within 3 cables of our mast. They are not looking for us." "Can we warn them about the derelicts to the south?" Faye asked. "Not without exposing ourselves," Louvigny said. "But they may not need us. They know they need to leave." I left the scope raised, steady, watching them bounce on a beam sea that would tire arms and backs quickly. I felt a pull so strong it surprised me, an urge to rise, open a hatch, haul them down into safety, and then accept whatever came after. It was not professional, it was human. And because it was human, it was dangerous to the 65 already in my care. "Down scope," I said again, both words tasting like something I would think about in quiet times for years. "We will watch at intervals and plot their course. If they clear the hazard drift and keep a stable bearing, we will let them go with our good wishes." "Sir," Faye said softly, "if they get into trouble beyond the shoal?" "We will evaluate then," I said. "For now, we stay unseen." They cleared. They found a groove in the small chop and settled into it. A crew who had likely never learned how, but were learning now because the sea is a teacher if you pay attention. They passed within 100 meters of a floating pallet stack that could have sheared the lower unit off their outboard. Whether by luck or alert eyes I could not know. They missed it. By noon, they were only a low line on a far horizon, and I let myself add one more to the good column. The British trace left the sector by afternoon, or at least put down roots quieter than our ears. Our own boat breathed more easily with that. I used that window to gather my senior leaders in the wardroom for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation so far, because Shaw had not had the luxury of becoming quiet just so it could be calmer for me. Dr. Fontenay walked in last, his face carefully neutral, and sat with his hands folded gently. He did not make me ask. "We have a second patient," he said. "Not severe, no fever. Instead, a set of behavioral symptoms that could be stress, but that worry me. Disorientation, irritability, a sense of unreality. It is Second Maitre Pelissier from the forward berthing. He says the air smells wrong to him and that the lights are too bright. Could be anything, Chabrier said, but her eyes were on mine. Could be the last weeks. Could be fear. Agreed, Fontenay said. I have him in a quiet bunk and I'll observe overnight. If his symptoms change, we will intervene. If they change, how? Louvigny asked, a precision that made the room colder. If he becomes a danger to himself or others, the doctor said. I have sedatives appropriate for controlling agitation out of proportion to current stimuli. I do not want to use them unless necessary. The boat absorbed that, the way the hull absorbs small sounds and makes them part of its being. We agreed on a rule. No one would be alone in a compartment unsupervised for long. Watches would pair up. The control room would get more frequent walkthroughs by officers not on watch. And crucially, anyone feeling wrong in their own mind would be treated as a patient, not a problem. At the end of that meeting, when the others had left, Fontenay remained. Captain, he said, if something worse happens, if there is truly something contagious, our only defense is isolation. We cannot evacuate a patient to a shore facility. We cannot ask for a medevac. The boat is a closed system. The rule will be to keep our distance, and that will be the hardest thing we do. I know, I said. I hate it, and I know. Night in a submarine is a story told by light bulbs. The brightness changes to a shade that tells the brain it may at last rest. The navigation plot glows like a modest constellation. People sleep in turns, and the boat sighs. That was the sound when the general alarm sounded 3 short rings, and the voice of Chabrier came through the ship's circuit with a balance of urgency and control that made me proud, even before I knew why. Security to forward berthing, captain to COC. I ran. The strides come back, even if you have never actually had to make them. In the COC, Vartanian was already half rising from his chair, Faye at the comms panel, with her headset crooked up on her hair, and Chabrier with her hand on the throttle, like a person ready to slow an argument down with force if needed. What have we got? I said. Second Maitre Pelissier left his rack disoriented, Chabrier said. He pushed past a crewman in the passageway. He did not strike him, more like he did not see him. He reached the watertight door, stared at it, turned, and began walking toward the torpedo room with a fixed look. We intercepted him at the ladder. He resisted, not violent, just strong. He is now with Fontenay. The doctor has administered a light sedative. He will sleep. I breathed in and out, counting the way the psychologists teach you. No one hurt. No one hurt, she said. Very well, I said. We keep the watch routine. We reassure his watchmates. We do not spread fear. And we make a quiet note that our second compartment may be used as a secondary isolation if needed. Pelissier woke hours later, calm and embarrassed, with no memory of his walk. Fontenay examined him again and found nothing that screamed. I visited him and spoke not as a commander, but as a person. He cried silently, and I pretended not to notice more than necessary. Sometimes the best thing a captain can do is let a sailor feel without fixing it in public. By the 3rd week, we had seen enough of Brest to build a doctrine. We would not go back in. We would skirt the approaches on the edge of detection. We would harvest information, and we would search the open sea for hazards we could responsibly reduce. The hazard that finally asked for our hand was not a dramatic one. It was a tanker creeping at idle on a track toward the islands of Malines and Ouessant. Too slowly to be controlled, too fast to be ignored, the forecast put a stiff wind on its nose in 2 days that would push it to a landfall that might be ruinous for the pristine rocks and for any small port in the way. We needed to change its fate without turning the sea into fire. That meant not the tanks, not the midships, but the bow compartments, metal and air that, if open to water, would change trim and sink the forward section slowly. It would not be elegant. It would be safer than leaving it. We can do it with an F-21 in proximity mode set shallow, Nose to bow at 30 meters, Ravel said, his voice in the professional register of a weapons specialist briefing in peacetime. Or, if we live dangerously, we could get close and put a team topside to set a shaped charge at the horse hole. But that is madness in the current world. It is madness in any world, I said. We will not put anyone topside near an uncontrolled vessel. The torpedo will do. We sent a short request through our protected channel, packaged in the smallest transmission that could carry a moral weight, our plan, our reasoning, our assurances that this was at a distance from any humans, and that weather and drift made this the least harmful path. We did not know who, if anyone, would read it. We waited 1 hour, then 4, then 8, because sometimes restraint is the difference between a necessary act and a regret. No answer came. In the end, the captain is the reader of last resort. We set up the firing solution with the precision of a bowline tied in darkness. Vartanian gave me the water's truth about current and depth. Chabria sent a drone, a small commercial quadcopter we had adopted aboard for close-up inspection work during exercises and kept in a sealed case, up through a modified mast tube at PD, letting it kiss the sky just long enough to give me one more image of the tanker's bow. We were careful. We were quick. What that little machine sent back was a steady close-in view. A grey hull with streaks, chain links the size of a man's torso disappearing into murky water, and no figures on deck. I gave the order with a voice that sounded to my ears older than when I left Toulon. Tube 1, load F-21, set run shallow, proximity detonation, target bow forward of the collision bulkhead, fire on my command. The room became the thing it becomes in those seconds, a machine that happens to be made of people. The firing team moved through checks written in tone of voice, not words. The launch itself was almost nothing in the boat, just a tremor in the forward compartment and a check mark on the panel. The F-21 swam away, whispering through the water toward a meeting with steel. We went deep and listened. Minutes later, a sound like the end of an old bridge, muffled, serious, contained, touched our hull. The next time we kissed the scope up, the tanker's bow rode lower. Water lapped into a new wound with the patient certainty of physics. The ship's track corrected in a way that meant it would not, now, make the island. It would settle, slowly, in water deep enough to be everything but a headline. I felt relief tempered by a sadness I could not name. We had altered fate. We had done harm to prevent worse harm. If there had been anyone on deck to see it, they would have waved, or they would have cursed us. There is no applause in such work. The duel we avoided with the British boat found us again 2 days later. We were clear of Brest, mapping a stretch of sea we had chosen for its quiet, when Vartanian murmured, "Contact, bearing 161, quality high, British astute again, I believe. But Captain, listen to this." He piped the raw feed into the room. Over the mechanical picture of machinery and flow, a faint, rhythmic thump sounded. On, off, on, off. Not a system noise, but an irregular companion to motion. "Could be something loose in the hull banging," Chabrier said. "Could be a door," Louvigny said. "Could be a human behavior." We tried the UWT again with the cautious sameness of our earlier attempts. We announced our presence in a way that would not invite a torpedo. We used phrases that said we were French. We said we were not closing. Silence came back. Then the astute's trace changed. Speed up, slow, up again, no nice curve to it. And Vartanian swore under his breath. "Whoever has the con on that boat is fighting with themselves or with someone else," he said. "They're making human moves, not textbook ones. The sea asks you to decide without enough data. I chose distance. We slid out under a layer that turned their energy back at them, and we made ourselves so small to sonar that I could almost feel the decibels going quiet in my own bones. The astute did not follow. I imagined them on their own plot, with a junior officer making a decision to keep the steel alive, rather than prove something to a French captain he could not see. I thought about sending a message for them to find later, a buoy with a note. I did not. Not because I did not care, because the best thing I could do for them was not complicate their life even a little. Our next medical event did not announce itself with fever. Maître Delorme, a weapons tech whose humour had been our ballast since Toulon, began snapping at shipmates over nothing: coffee cups, a misplaced wrench, a carefully labelled box of gaskets he decided was not labelled enough. Then he miscounted a checklist he had never miscounted. Fontenay brought him to the surgery on the pretext of a routine blood pressure check and kept him there. I visited. "Captain," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes, "I think the lights are too white in here." "We can adjust them," I said, and we did, shifting the colour temperature to a warmer tone meant to be easier on tired minds. "I keep thinking about my father," he said, staring at a point past my shoulder. He was a machinist. He could fit a bearing into a seat by feel alone. He said the trick was patience, not force. "Good advice," I said. "I think I have lost my patience," he said. "I'm sorry." "Then we will find it together," I said, because that is what you say when you have nothing else to give but will not betray your own fear. Fontenay kept him under observation. Delorme slept. He woke with more gentle edges and apologized to the ship. People forgave him because they wanted to be forgiven when their turn came. We had avoided another kind of escalation for now. On the day the elf truly died, not just in our reception equipment, but in the background sense of being watched by someone competent, I went to the torpedo room alone and stood with the inert cheek of a weapon under my hand. The F-21 SC sat in their racks like big, obedient animals waiting to be told to run. They are tools. We are the ethics. It is easier to think that equipment carries morality so that you do not have to carry it all yourself. That is a lie that will get you into trouble anywhere, but especially under the sea. "Captain," Ravel said gently from the hatch, "we've tuned everything that can be tuned. We're ready for whatever you ask." "What I ask is always the same," I said. "Keep the boat alive, and in doing so, we may keep more than this boat alive." He nodded and slipped away. We had to decide what our next weeks would be. Options lay in front of us, none very good, a few defensible. We could stay at sea and continue to be eyes, ears, and at most, a precise hand for removing hazards that had no humans attached to them. We could seek a rendezvous with any French naval asset left at sea to share information and perhaps food. We could head for a quiet anchorage far from major population centres, surface at night, and try to take on fish or supplies from well-meaning locals, an insane risk to our sealed system. Or we could try to carve a path to a place rumoured to be safe, one of the islands far offshore, where populations are small and self-sufficient, hoping that by careful approach and strict distance, we could work out a protocol with their leaders to anchor near but not among them. The crew needed a narrative to live in. Without one, fears grow in the unoccupied corners of the mind. I called an all-hands by circuit. I spoke plainly, like a person, not a silhouette behind a title. "Rutst, we are afloat in a time where the calendar and the normal maps no longer tell the whole truth," I said. "We have 3 missions we can claim as ours by right. Keep this crew alive and healthy, help prevent harm at sea when we can do so without making new harm, and preserve French capability for a time when the country's net rises again. We will not become a ship that haunts coasts. We will not become pirates. We will not ignore calls for help we can responsibly honour. And we will not let fear break our discipline. We will chart north and west along the edge of known lanes. We will gather the picture, and we will look for a place to anchor in deep water where we can rest, train, and be ready. This is not surrender to drift. This is strategy." No one cheered. They did not need to. There is a kind of silence on a submarine that is agreement. We found a place on the chart I would have called lovely in a different life. A stretch of water between low, uninhabited islets, with depth enough for us to hold station quietly, and a sound speed profile that made us a rumour. We settled in there for a week of full maintenance, seal checks, filter rotations, and boredom that felt like peace. People slept through an entire watch when not on deck because their bodies had been running at a speed they had not admitted. Laughter returned in small, irregular bubbles. Maître Baptiste allowed himself to make a pudding, and the aroma went down the forward passageway, like an announcement that maybe we were not all ghosts. In that stillness, with systems humming and minds exhaling, we received a transmission unlike the others. It came over a makeshift net, not formal, but carrying the rhythm of a person doing their best. In clear French, with Breton traces, a voice announced that a flotilla of small boats was holding station off the Ile de Seine, coordinating fishers and local officials to ferry essentials to nearby older residents who could not leave their homes. They had created protocols: approach only by prearranged time, keep 6 meters distance, toss lines and haul goods. If anyone on the quay seemed disoriented or moved in a way that did not respond to voice commands, abandon the transfer and leave. It was messy, humane, and exactly the kind of measured courage I wanted to believe still existed. The next sentence hit something in me I had been careful not to touch. We ask any capable vessel to help with one task. There is a large derelict hulk drifting toward the Ras de Seine. If it enters the race, it will become a hazard that will chew small boats and push them into rocks. If someone can adjust its course from a safe distance, we would be grateful. I looked around at my officers. They looked back at me. No one needed to design a morality now. It had presented itself. We went to work with a clean sight that comes when a task fits your hands. We found the derelict with passive and then with optics when the light cooperated. It was a steel-hulled island of containers and loss, moving too slowly to be dramatic and too surely to be ignored. No figures aboard, no radio, only the sea. We needed to nudge it, not destroy it. An SM-39 exocet is designed to strike a ship and ruin its day. This was not the instrument. A torpedo could be too much. Chabrier suggested a different approach. Time the drift and the tide and use our wake and a short burst of speed at periscope depth to create a knuckle, a turbulence in the water that would exert sideways force over minutes. We would perform this maneuver twice at calculated points. It was subtle, physical, elegant, and entirely within our capacity. We did it at dawn in a pale light that made the sea feel like time itself. The boat moved like a whispered argument, all breath and intent. We slid past the hulk at a distance that made my shoulders tight, and then poured a little speed into the pump jet, with Chabrier's hand coaxing rather than commanding. The water boiled for a moment in a way you would not see unless you were looking for it. The hulk's bow shifted a degree. 10 minutes later, half a degree more. A second pass, another curl of water, and the trackline we plotted diverged from the worst case toward a place where the Ras de Seine would not become a blender for small boats. Elegant, Vartanian said, softly enough that I could pretend I did not hear if anyone wanted me to be humorless. We sent a brief, anonymized update. The Breton voice came back an hour later with a tone you get to hear only rarely in command. Gratitude without worship, relief without surrender. Merci, whoever you are, that will do. Then, because stories refused to end cleanly, we faced the worst choice I had feared since the first broadcast. Dr. Fontenay called me to the aft compartment. Matelot Arnaud, the young sailor who had recovered from a fever earlier, had relapsed. The fever was higher now, his eyes unfocused, his movements jerkier. He had tried to get out of the isolation bunk and had moved with a force that surprised his own frame. Fontenay had administered a heavier sedative and secured him gently but firmly. "This may not pass," Fontenay said. "If it is what we fear, it may progress to a state where he cannot understand us and cannot control himself. If that happens, we cannot care for him here without risking others." The words I had not wanted to say waited in my mouth. We cannot bring him into contact with the crew. We cannot let him wander. We cannot abandon him. "No," he said, "we cannot abandon him." We shaped a policy we prayed we would not need. It was a 3-stage protocol. Stage 1, Isolation under medical care, with sedation as needed. Maximum respect for the person. Stage 2. If deterioration continued, we would prepare a decompression chamber we carried for special operations as a secondary isolation habitat, with independent air handling and communication. Stage 3. If we could safely reach a secure shore facility or a controlled transfer point where medical professionals on land could take custody without risk to the public, we would do so, even if it meant a controlled exposure of the boat to a brief surface window. The parts we did not say out loud were the ones that kept me awake. What if no secure facility existed? What if no transfer could be done without risk? Then we would keep the chamber sealed, the patient sedated, and we would hold a vigil. We did not reach stage 3. Over 2 days that redefined our definition of vigilance, our no improved. Whether it was not the contagion we feared, or whether the early isolation and care had shaped his course, I cannot say. He woke on the 3rd morning lucid, and cried without sound for a long time, and I did not interrupt him until he was ready. We shaved our faces together in silence at the small sink, and I pretended not to notice when his hands shook at the end. The boat breathed again. The respite turned us toward the endgame decisions. We could not remain at sea forever on 20% rations, burning the same minutes. We needed a sustainable path. The Îles de Glennon and the Azores crossed our chart table as possibilities. The Azores carried rumours of low infection and organised communities. The Glennon were closer, but dependent on mainland flows in normal times. A third option sat in the geometry of the sea, the open ocean, away from everything, near the shipping lanes that had turned quiet. It would be solitude without support. I made a plan that split the difference. We would slide southwest, keeping a comfortable offing from the coast, and head toward a point equidistant from the Bay of Biscay trouble and the Azorean hope. From there, we would listen. If we heard that the Azores held order, we would approach with dignity and care, establish communication at a distance, and work out a way to contribute without breaking our sealed world. If not, we would find a place to hover and become a node of information, helping derelicts not to become disasters and small boats not to become tragedies. Before we turned, we did one more pass of Brest with the optics. The fires were fewer. The movement on the quays had a different quality, less frenzy, more grim routine. I do not know if that meant order or exhaustion. The military piers remained too clean. The astute was not in our water, or else she decided to be a myth for a time. I whispered to no one and everyone a simple wish. May your steel be intact and your people kind to one another. We left without ceremony because submarines do not do ceremony underway. We are ceremony. Every checklist, every measured announcement, every hand on a valve is ritual with meaning. We turned our bow to a longitude that promised less noise and more choice. We slid into the layer where sound bends in our favor, and the white noise of the pump jet was the boat's version of a lullaby. I walked the compartments one last time before letting myself sleep. Maitre Baptiste was closing the galley with the humor I had missed. Vartanian had a fresh pencil behind his ear, ready to write down the next story the ocean told. Chabrier had the con and that look people get when they have become part of the machine they steer. Louvigny had written 2 letters, one folded on his desk and one in his head for no one but himself. Fontenay sat in the surgery making notes that would be a book of lessons someday. Back in my cabin, I took out the small notebook I carried on land and at sea. I wrote simple things: the date, our position by the nearest obvious landmark, the number of souls aboard, and one line for the future. We remain France, we remain ourselves, and we will not let the worst thing in the world make us worse. The next days would be complicated, and the ones after that more so. There would be arguments and compromises, precision evolutions and dull watches, a tired boat that still needed love, and a tired crew that still deserved it. There would be transmissions that felt like lifelines, and others we would ignore because they were bait. There would be weather, there would be night, there would be a call someday from a voice that said a port was open under rules, and we would debate those rules, with the ferocity of people who have learned their limits. There would be moments when we would be asked to fire something at something else, and I would carry that choice in my bones for the rest of my life. But for now, the ocean was a steady friend and a stern teacher, and Suffren was a place where physics and ethics still had a table to sit at together. We would use what we were built to do to serve what we were built to be. We would not surface where crowds were desperate. We would not open our hatch to the first wave of hands and risk becoming useless forever. We would not turn our boat into a throne. We would, instead, become a quiet point of order in a world that had misplaced the word. When dawn came, it came like it always does, regardless of the headlines. We set course and depth. The sound speed profile bent in our favor. The towed array whispered its stories. In the COC, the plot glowed with patient lines. Somewhere far to the east, a city smoldered. Somewhere west, an island might have people who had discovered how to be neighbors in a new age. Between those, the water and us, reminding each other that survival is not a posture, it is a practice. We sailed, not to flee, not to chase, but to persist. And in persisting, we made a promise. When the call came that civilization had found a toehold, we would be there with charts in hand, with stories of how to avoid rocks, with knowledge of what the sea had done to those who underestimated it, and with a crew who had learned how to be a city under pressure, breathing the same air and respecting the same rules. If that is not hope, then hope is not a thing for submariners. But I have served long enough to know that hope fits even inside a pressure hull. And in the dark water, hope was the quietest and most powerful weapon we carried. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.